What if Anakin Skywalker had been trained by a different Jedi, perhaps Mundi? Of all of the scenarios in which Anakin is trained by a different master than Obi-Wan Kenobi, Mundi would probably be at the very end of most fans' lists. He was known as one of the most rigid members of the Jedi Council and Order, strict in the Jedi way and completely unwavering in his opinion. Some have even said that Mundi is so emotionless and uncaring that he deserved Order 66. However, not all is as it appears, as is in most cases with Star Wars. And what many do not know is that at one point in the Clone Wars, Anakin did train directly under Mundi. Although their interactions are few and far between, Anakin and Mundi are actually a pair of unlikely friends. And according to our research, they may have had a working acquaintanceship in the background that we just don't get to see all that often. However, although the two respect one another, they do have their distinct differences. In today's Holocron, we're going to talk about the strange friendship between Anakin and Mundi, and how the friendship was born when Anakin was forced to be the Padawan of Mundi for a time. We're also going to explore what may have been if Anakin had been trained by Mundi from the very beginning, a scenario that is way more likely than you may think. Mundi seems like the last person in the entirety of the Jedi Order that Anakin Skywalker would get along with and talk to. Mundi was rooted deeply in the light and staunchly rigid in the Jedi path. We once accused him of taking the Jedi Code far too literally and becoming so emotionless towards others that he felt absolutely nothing when his family died. But as we said earlier, there's far more to Mundi than at first meets the eye. He has an incredibly rich history based on his homeworld of Syria. The reason Mundi feels like such a stickler is because of his political opinion on his home planet. You see, the birth rate of males among his species is 1 to 20 in odds, making survival paramount. He was allowed to have a family by the Jedi Council because of this reason. As one of the only males of the planet, it was his duty to have several wives and to sire as many children as possible to keep his species going. On his planet, Mundi was a popular political figure as well. He advocated for conservative values, he didn't trust the corruption of the Senate, and perpetuated that Syria should remain separate from the Republic. He saw what happens when the Republic's politics reach other planets. Their culture often became married by bureaucracy, and the beauty of their planet was ruled by industrialization. Mundi was in love with his homeworld and his people's way of life, and so he opposed them joining the Republic. He was a traditionalist above all else, which translated into how he ran his family, and how he behaved as a Jedi. Despite having a reputation of being an emotionless stick in the mud, Mundi and Anakin have far more in common than you might think. Like Anakin, Mundi actually struggled immensely with these feelings of attachment and anger. Yoda was concerned for a young Mundi because he always made his intentions clear to return to his world and to liberate them from warlords that had oppressed his people. As a boy, Mundi watched as the warlord beat his father on multiple occasions and bossed his family around, exploiting them for money and food. Though he sensed no anger or fear in Mundi, Yoda was worried that he was consumed by a desire for vengeance. And Yoda was right. Mundi would indeed take vengeance when he returned to his world many years later, but he learned a valuable lesson when he was there. Those who bully others are cowards in themselves. Mundi struggled with being a Jedi and having a family at the same time. He loved his family dearly, but he did everything he could to stay detached from them, finding it difficult to strike a balance between attachment and duty. In the middle of being a Jedi of the Republic as well as a member of the High Council, Mundi regularly had to go home and to spend great deal amounts of time with his family. He had 4 wives and many daughters, those that he struggled to connect with due to her growing rebellious nature. There was also a rift between Mundi and his daughter because Mundi had always desired a son, but instead, all he got were daughters. There was a point in time that this specific daughter got herself into trouble with a group of terrorists, and Mundi went out to rescue her. The entire mission was a massive internal battle for Mundi, as he wasn't able to use his lightsaber due to earlier troubles, so he was having to rescue his daughter from gangsters without his Jedi weapon, and without succumbing to emotion. Despite his daughter being threatened, in the midst of this crisis, he learned to appreciate his daughter and to not wish for anyone else. The point to all of this is that Mundi is actually a lot more emotional than people give him credit for, ourselves included. It's just that when we see him, he is a wizened Jedi master in the Clone Wars. He has gone through all of these events, learned from them. He has learned to overcome his emotional attachments and to not be driven by anger or desperation. What's fascinating is Anakin seems to pick up on this, as he respects Mundi for this one reason. Not to mention, unlike people like Mace Windu, Mundi never seemed overtly hostile or disapproving of Anakin despite their way of thinking. And how different it was. That was because Mundi had experienced stubborn Padawans before. Not only had he once been one, but he was the first master of another Jedi by the name of Asherad Het. Asherad had watched a bounty hunter murder his father, and was now on a path of revenge himself. We get very few interactions with Anakin and Mundi on screen, with the first and most prominent of them being in the canon Clone Wars series. In the episode, Mundi comments about how Anakin and Ahsoka count their droid kills and compares it to a game. He couldn't quite understand how the two of them were able to trivialize battle in such a way, but later on, after the terrible campaign was over, Master Mundi would actually playfully participate in their game, informing Anakin that he had destroyed 65 of the droids, beating out both his and Ahsoka's score. Mundi then asked Anakin what he had won, with Anakin being shocked that he had participated when he had chastised them before, and he told Mundi that he had won his respect. Obi-Wan then mentioned that it was a gift that Anakin rarely bestows upon anyone. In Legends, we get their best moments together in the Clone Wars comic books. While Anakin was still a Jedi Padawan, it was thought that Obi-Wan had died during the Battle of Jabim, but his death was faked by Ventress, who had taken him captive. So while Obi-Wan was still escaping, Anakin was struggling to cope with the loss of his Jedi Master. Anakin didn't feel his master die within the Force, so he refused to believe that he was actually gone, despite what everyone was telling him. In fact, Anakin was having dreams that Obi-Wan was not only alive, but in trouble, and needed his help dearly. After the Battle of Agragorar, the Jedi Council assigned Ki-Adi-Mundi to temporarily serve as Anakin's Jedi Master, a task that Mundi readily accepted. The one and only comic where we see Anakin under Mundi's tutelage begins with the young Skywalker waking up from another nightmare. He chooses to go tinker with his starship at the time, as a form of mobile meditation. Here we get to see how Anakin despises typical Jedi meditation techniques. He's not good at sitting still at all. Anakin says that when he gets to work with his hands, his mind becomes free, and he can finally focus. Because according to Anakin, machines just made sense. There are reasons things don't work, straightforward ways to make them better. But his moving meditation is interrupted when Ki-Adi-Mundi walks in to check on him, noting that he could sense Anakin's distress from across the ship. Like always, Anakin tries to wall up, but he encourages him to open up and to be honest. Anakin divulges that he doesn't feel that Obi-Wan is truly dead, and Mundi pragmatically states that if that were true, then Obi-Wan would have made himself known. Mundi goes on to express that throughout the comic that he believes that Anakin is in deep denial and that his feelings are deceiving him. It's at this point that Mundi opens up to Anakin a bit, tells him that he felt similarly when his own family was killed on the Battle of Syria. All of this, all of his wives and his daughters had been wiped out, and he had found this incredibly difficult, but that Mundi did so in order to stay true to his beliefs as a Jedi. Anakin takes the opportunity to ask Mundi how he even had a family in the first place due to the Jedi Code. The Master explains his unique circumstance due to his species' customs and the low male birth rate. Mundi also explains that the Code only technically forbade Jedi attachment, and that he candidly tells Anakin that he tried to remain unattached from his family, although it was difficult. Anakin responds that it's difficult and confusing because he's told to trust his feelings, but that his feelings aren't allowed, and that they are misleading to him. Mundi simply tells the young boy that he is still a Jedi Padawan, and that all of these things will become much clearer with guidance. He then tells his young student to rest. It wouldn't be long until they would reach their destination, where they would all be called to deal with pirates. While all of this was happening, Obi-Wan and ARC Trooper Alpha were actually escaping from Ventress and had crash-landed on another world. They were there currently fighting off bounty hunters for their survival, and this all just so happened to be where Mundi and the other Jedi in this system were fighting the pirates. During the space battle, Anakin was constantly distracted as he felt Obi-Wan through the Force, and could see him in a vision crash landing. More than once, Ki-Adi-Mundi had to shout at Anakin to focus during the fighting, as he almost rammed right into the pirate's main vessel. Anakin managed not only to veer out of the way at the last minute though, but also destroyed the pirate ship. He let out a yell of excitement, and Mundi harshly scolded him, saying that not only were his actions reckless, but the Jedi do not exult in the death of their enemies. However, Anakin clarified that he was happy that he had felt Obi-Wan nearby, and once again, Mundi tells him not to let his own desires cloud his mind, that Mundi felt nothing of Kenobi's presence. But Plo Koon and Adi Gallia, who were also in the Starfighters, encourages Mundi to allow Anakin to follow this lead, as the bond between a master and apprentice is very strong, and his feelings could prove to be fruitful. Mundi agrees, and follows Anakin to the planet where Obi-Wan was sensed. At this point, Ki-Adi-Mundi admits that he finally can sense Obi-Wan's presence as well, but he begins sending word for an extraction team to meet them there. However, Anakin was not willing to wait for any help, and he flies directly into the planet against Mundi's instruction. They both eventually found Obi-Wan and Alpha in the middle of a thick battle with bounty hunters. The two Jedi quickly join the battle, and Anakin is elated to finally find his master alive. As they're all swinging their sabers and deflecting blaster bolts, Mundi aggravatedly tells Anakin that they're going to have to talk later about disobeying direct orders, but to focus on the here and the now. After the battle is over, Mundi gladly hands mastership of the Padawan of Anakin back to Obi-Wan, as he summarizes his experience like this: "Take your Padawan back, maybe he will at least listen to you." In the end, Anakin and Ki-Adi-Mundi definitely had a lot more in common, which led them to respect one another. However, they expressed frustration with one another simply due to their differences in their life position. Anakin was obviously disliking of Mundi's slowness to action and his strict abidance to the structure, but Anakin of course believed that this was all holding him back. Mundi, on the other hand, was annoyed by Anakin's rashness and emotional personality. But now that we've looked at what actually happened during the Clone Wars, and when Ki-Adi-Mundi was actually the Jedi Master of Anakin, what would it look like if he were to remain a permanent master of a 9-year-old Anakin Skywalker, rather than Obi-Wan? In this time, the Jedi Council acknowledges Anakin's brashness, realizing that he needs a more experienced hand than Kenobi, who was only freshly a Jedi Knight. They turn over to Ki-Adi-Mundi, who had trained the once incredibly powerful and once vengeful A'Sharad Het. A'Sharad Het and Anakin have a ton in common, both trained at a very old age, both helming from Tatooine, and Mundi had successfully trained A'Sharad to become a powerful Jedi Master. I feel like since the two have a lot in common, they would talk a lot more than Anakin and Obi-Wan ever did. That was a difficult thing in their relationship. Obi-Wan, growing up in the Jedi Temple, knew nothing about family or attachment, two things that Anakin severely struggled with. Obi-Wan also hadn't lost anyone the way that Anakin did when his mother died. Mundi is familiar with all of these things though, and so he would have been able to sense Anakin's distress at the loss of his mother. Having said that though, Ki-Adi-Mundi was even stricter as a Jedi than Obi-Wan was, and even though he could relate to Anakin, I don't see Ki-Adi-Mundi offering any comfort or compassion to the boy. I believe that Mundi would attempt to teach Anakin the lessons that he had learned as a young man, but Ki-Adi-Mundi was strict and cold in his teaching style. It's not like that these lessons would take root the way that he intended them to within Anakin. Ki-Adi-Mundi is a far more commanding presence than Obi-Wan. Anakin would be more obedient to him in the long run, and less likely to be as rebellious or disrespectful than he was with Obi-Wan. But having said that, Anakin's personality is still going to shine through, and he still will take rash actions based on emotion. Case in point, I still believe that he would fall in love with Padme. He would probably keep the information completely secret from his master, and while Mundi was good at picking up emotional cues from others, he doesn't seem to be very perceptive on uncovering truths in certain situations. So I believe that Anakin would keep this relationship hidden. It's possible that a young Padawan would try to see if he could get an exception for marriage as Ki-Adi-Mundi did, but upon seeing how much Mundi had to live unattached from his family, it's likely that Anakin would deny this course of action and wouldn't seek his master's help. As far as powers go, I think that he would grow similarly to how he did in the original timeline, but his Gem So style we believe would be stronger. Ki-Adi-Mundi was a practitioner as Form 5, and so he would be able to teach Anakin a more refined and a traditional style of Shien and Gem So. Rather than Obi-Wan and Anakin being the center of Geonosis, it would be Anakin and Mundi. The two of them would face down Dooku, but since Anakin is more tempered than he is originally, he waits to fight the Sith Lord with his Jedi Master. The two of them together using Gem So would be able to at the very least pressure Dooku, making it difficult to separate the Jedi. However, he is a master duelist and would likely down Mundi and get Anakin alone. Anakin likely would have been a much better fighter here though, having originally started with Gem So rather than starting with Ataru. It's even possible that Anakin doesn't lose an arm, only suffers minor injuries by the time that Yoda arrives. Having said that, I believe that Anakin falls into Palpatine's trap of manipulation still. Even if he didn't want revenge on Dooku, Anakin would still have very few people to turn to, and Palpatine would be waiting. With Mundi as his master, Anakin still becomes Vader, still falls to the dark side because of Palpatine and Padme, but the process is a longer struggle than it was before. Having loyalty to the Jedi way drilled into him by Mundi for years, it's possible that it could take longer for Palpatine's part to turn against the Jedi, to turn Anakin against the Jedi. The Clone Wars likely lasts for another year or two because of this, but eventually, Anakin does embrace the dark side. Mundi does push him too far. He's far less of a brother than Obi-Wan ever was. If Mundi was around when Anakin became Vader, the two of them would inevitably fight. Mundi would not allow his student to become a servant of the dark side, so he would not attempt to reason with Anakin. Mundi would swallow his feelings with the intent to execute his Jedi student. However, the problem comes in where Obi-Wan knew to find Anakin by following Padme. Mundi would not know this, and therefore wouldn't know how to get to Mustafar. Anakin doesn't lose his temper at the arrival of his Jedi Master. He doesn't kill Padme, but the two still have a falling out. Perhaps Padme even returns to Mundi and tells him where Anakin is. It's possible that the fight between Anakin and Mundi doesn't even happen on Mustafar at all. But for brevity's sake, let's assume it does. Nightfall Vader is much more powerful than Mundi is. Despite the council member having lots of experience with Gem So, he actually switched his style to Form 2 somewhere back in the lore, as he felt Form 2 would help him temper his own anger. Even if he fell back into Form 5 to fight off his Padawan, Anakin's Gem So would be so sharply refined that he would eviscerate Mundi. The fight on Mustafar would not last nearly as long as it had against Obi-Wan, not a fraction, and it's likely that they wouldn't even have left the control room. Anakin does not burn, he has all of his limbs, and not only this, but Padme is alive. This continues to give him a reason to fight. So we get a full-powered Lord Vader, all of his conviction. Obi-Wan survives Utapau and goes into hiding with Yoda, who also still fails to kill the Emperor. However, Obi-Wan isn't there when Padme gives birth to the twins, and has no reason to take them into hiding. This means that Bail Organa likely isn't there either, as Anakin ensured that Padme has her children at the Imperial Hospital. Obi-Wan, not having trained Anakin, would not know to go into exile on Tatooine, so he would likely end up somewhere else. But I believe it's only a matter of time before Lord Vader tracks down and kills Obi-Wan as well. I think that Obi-Wan does in fact die to Vader in this timeline. He doesn't know Anakin's fighting style the way that he does in the original story, since the two hadn't been training against one another. Obi-Wan is still a master of Sarisu, but without the precarious environment of Mustafar for him to use, Vader will be drawing upon the dark side until he finally breaks the defenses of the Jedi Master. If Mundi had trained Anakin, we would get the bad ending. Anakin would get everything he ever wanted, but in the worst way possible. He'd overthrow the Emperor. He would try to force Padme and the twins to live out this twisted reality. Many things would result from Anakin's training with Mundi, but without a very specific set of circumstances, I don't see it turning out well at all. But anyway, friends, this was the strange relationship that Anakin and Mundi had, and how Mundi was briefly Anakin's Jedi Master. Tell us, what do you think of the two of them, and how they were oddly friends in a certain way? If you enjoyed this video, and want to see more about how Anakin felt about other members of the Jedi High Council, please comment them down below and we'll make lore on them. As always, my friends, thank you so much for stopping by, and I hope you have an amazing day, and may the Force be with you.